Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she stared at the return address on the thick manila envelope. United States District Court, District of Massachusetts. Her heart pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears. For a moment, she considered not opening it at all, just throwing it in the fireplace of her Seattle apartment and pretending it never arrived. But that was impossible. Certified mail didn't just disappear. Outside her window, rain hammered against the glass in sheets, turning the Seattle skyline into a blur of gray and muted lights. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the world felt like it was closing in. Her cat, Pepper, meowed softly and rubbed against her legs, sensing her distress. Sarah had lived in this modest one-bedroom apartment for 10 years now, ever since she'd fled Boston with nothing but 2 suitcases and a secret that had been eating her alive ever since. With shaking fingers, she tore open the envelope. The words "Federal Subpoena" were printed in bold letters across the top of the document. Her vision blurred as she forced herself to read. "You are hereby commanded to appear before the United States District Court to testify in the matter of United States v. Whitmore and Associates, et al. Failure to appear may result in contempt of court charges, punishable by fine and imprisonment." The paper slipped from her hands and fluttered to the hardwood floor. Whitmore and Associates. The name she'd spent 12 years trying to forget. The prestigious Boston law firm where she'd worked as a paralegal fresh out of college, where she'd been ambitious, naive, and ultimately terrified into silence. Sarah stumbled to her couch and collapsed, her breath coming in short, rapid gasps. A panic attack. She'd had so many of these in the years after leaving Boston, but they'd finally stopped about 3 years ago. Now, with just the sight of that firm's name, they were back. She forced herself to breathe slowly. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique her therapist had taught her. Dr. Patricia Huang had been seeing Sarah for years, helping her process what she'd witnessed, the guilt she carried, the fear that had driven her to start over on the opposite coast. "Silence protects the guilty, Sarah," Dr. Huang had told her during their last session, "and it slowly destroys the innocent." Sarah grabbed her phone with trembling hands and scrolled to her therapist's number, but then stopped. It was after hours. Dr. Huang had a family, a life. Sarah couldn't keep calling her every time her past came knocking. She had to handle this herself. But how? She picked up the subpoena again, forcing herself to read the details. The trial was scheduled to begin in 11 days. She was to appear as a witness for the prosecution. The United States Attorney's Office had left a contact number and a name: Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Torres. Sarah's mind raced back to that night 12 years ago. August 14, 2012. She'd been 22 years old, working at her dream job, certain she was on the path to law school herself. She could still see it so clearly. The empty office building, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the sound of the industrial shredder roaring from the executive floor. She'd only gone back to the office because she'd forgotten her phone. Such a small decision. If she just left it, if she just waited until morning, her entire life would have been different. But she had gone back, and she'd seen them, Marcus Whitmore, the founding partner's golden boy son, along with partners Patrick Sullivan and David Kern, feeding boxes and boxes of documents into the shredder. She could still remember the way Marcus had looked at her when their eyes met through the glass wall. That cold, calculating smile. The way he'd walked toward her, casual and confident, like a predator approaching cornered prey. "You're working late, Sarah," he'd said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as suffocating. Even now, 12 years later, she could feel the fear that had frozen her in place. Sarah stood abruptly, packing her small living room. Pepper watched her with concerned yellow eyes from the windowsill. Think, she told herself. Think rationally. What were her options? Option 1, ignore the subpoena. But that would mean contempt of court charges, fines she couldn't afford, maybe even jail time. She'd built a quiet life here in Seattle, working as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, volunteering at the animal shelter, keeping her head down. A federal charge would destroy all of that. Option 2, show up and lie. Claim she didn't remember anything, but that was perjury, more jail time. And besides, could she really look a prosecutor in the eye and lie? Could she live with herself? Option 3, tell the truth. Face Marcus Whitmore again. Relive that nightmare. Risk everything, her safety, her peace, possibly her life. Marcus had powerful friends. People who'd witnessed against him in the past had found their careers destroyed, their reputations ruined. One former associate had been in a mysterious car accident that left him in a coma for 6 months. But then there was option 4, the one she didn't want to consider. What if telling the truth was the only way to finally be free? Sarah walked to her small kitchen and poured herself a glass of water with shaking hands. On her refrigerator was a postcard from her sister in Denver. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Sarah had always thought that quote was ridiculous. She preferred safety, routine, invisibility. But invisibility hadn't brought her peace. She still had nightmares. She still jumped when she saw expensive suits in coffee shops. She still carried the weight of knowing that her silence had cost people, real people, their chance at justice. The Henderson medical device case. That's what those documents had been about. She'd seen enough before they were shredded to know. Safety reports, test results showing defects, internal emails proving the company knew their devices were dangerous. And the firm had destroyed it all to protect their pharmaceutical company client. How many families had lost their lawsuits because of that destruction? How many children had been hurt because the truth never came out? Sarah looked at the subpoena again. 72 hours to make arrangements and fly to Boston. 72 hours to decide who she was going to be. The woman who hid in fear or the woman who finally stood up. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. "Hey, just checking in, how's your week going?" Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, "I need to tell you something. Can you call me?" As she waited for the phone to ring, Sarah walked to her bedroom closet and pulled out a small cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside were the only things she'd kept from her Boston days: her employee ID badge from Whitmore and Associates, some photos of the office, and a small notebook where she'd written down everything she remembered about that night: dates, times, names, details. She'd kept it as insurance, though she'd never planned to use it. The phone rang. Sarah answered, and her sister's cheerful voice filled the line. "Hey, what's up?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I got a subpoena today from Boston. They want me to testify about what I saw at the firm." There was a long pause, then quietly, "Oh, Sarah, are you going to do it?" Sarah looked at the notebook in her hands, at the careful notes she'd made 12 years ago, at the truth she'd been carrying all this time. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm terrified." "Whatever you decide," her sister said, "I'm here. You know that, right?" After they hung up, Sarah sat on her bedroom floor holding that notebook, rain still pounding against the windows. Pepper curled up in her lap, purring steadily. Outside, the city lights flickered through the storm. She had 72 hours to decide. 72 hours to choose between the safety of silence and the terrifying possibility of truth. 72 hours to figure out if she was brave enough to face the man who'd haunted her nightmares for over a decade. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading her old notes, preparing for a battle she'd been running from for 12 years. And as the rain finally stopped and dawn broke over Seattle, she made her decision. She opened her laptop and booked a one-way flight to Boston. Sarah Mitchell had never felt more alive than she did in those first 6 months at Whitmore and Associates. At 22 years old, fresh out of Boston University with a degree in political science and dreams of law school, landing a paralegal position at one of the city's most prestigious firms felt like winning the lottery. The office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in the financial district. Everything about it screamed success, from the marble lobby to the original artwork on the walls to the espresso machine that probably cost more than Sarah's first car. The partners wore suits that cost thousands of dollars, and even the other paralegals carried themselves with a confidence Sarah desperately wanted to emulate. "You're so lucky," her roommate Jenna had said when Sarah got the job. "Do you know how many people would kill for that position?" Sarah knew. She'd beaten out 200 other candidates. Marcus Whitmore himself had interviewed her, his charm so potent she'd almost forgotten to breathe. He was 38, Harvard Law partner track since birth as the founding partner's son, and everything Sarah thought a successful attorney should be: sharp, articulate, commanding. "You have potential, Sarah," he'd told her during that interview, his blue eyes intense. "We don't just hire assistants here. We hire future lawyers, people who understand that excellence isn't optional, it's the baseline." She'd practically floated out of that interview. The first 6 months were brutal but exhilarating. 18-hour days were common. Sarah learned to survive on coffee and adrenaline, to read legal documents at lightning speed, to anticipate what the attorneys needed before they asked. She worked primarily for Marcus and 2 other partners, Patrick Sullivan and David Kern, on complex corporate litigation cases. The Henderson medical device case was their biggest. A pharmaceutical company called Henderson Medical was being sued by multiple families whose children had been injured by a heart monitoring device. The families claimed the devices were defective, that Henderson had rushed them to market without proper testing. Henderson Medical was a major client of the firm, worth millions in annual billings. Sarah had assembled deposition binders, organized exhibits, tracked down witnesses. She'd believed they were on the right side, that the family's claims were baseless, that the science would prove Henderson's devices were safe. That belief died on the night of August 14th. It had been a Tuesday, and Sarah was supposed to meet friends for drinks at a bar in Cambridge. She'd left the office at 7 p.m., exhausted but happy, already mentally celebrating the end of another crushing day. She was halfway to the T station when she realized her phone wasn't in her purse. "Damn it," she'd muttered, turning back. The phone was new, an iPhone 5 her parents had given her for her birthday, and expensive enough that leaving it overnight in the office made her nervous. She'd used her keycard to access the building at 7:43 p.m. The security guard, an older man named Tom who always had a kind word for everyone, waved at her from his desk. "Forgot something," he called. "My phone," Sarah said, hurrying to the elevator, just running up to grab it. The building was eerily quiet at night. During the day, it buzzed with activity, attorneys rushing between offices, phones ringing, the constant hum of deal-making and litigation. But after hours, with most of the lights off and only emergency lighting in the hallways, it felt almost abandoned. Sarah's desk was on the 3rd floor, in a bullpen area with 5 other paralegal stations. She found her phone right where she'd left it, plugged into her computer charger. She grabbed it, checked that she hadn't missed any important messages, and was about to leave when she heard it. A mechanical roaring sound coming from the floor above. The executive floor, the 4th floor where the partners had their offices. Sarah froze, listening. The sound was distinctive, an industrial shredder. The firm had several throughout the office for disposing of sensitive documents, but it was after 8 p.m. Who was shredding documents at this hour? Curiosity pulled her toward the stairs. She told herself she was just making sure everything was okay, that maybe someone had left a shredder running by accident. But the truth was, after 6 months of feeling like the lowest person on the totem pole, she was interested in what important work was happening after hours. The 4th floor was dimly lit, but the conference room at the end of the hall was blazing with light. The walls were glass, offering a clear view of the interior. And inside, Sarah could see 3 figures moving around a massive industrial shredder positioned in the center of the room. She recognized them immediately: Marcus Whitmore, Patrick Sullivan, and David Kern. All three were in dress shirts with rolled-up sleeves, ties loosened. Around them were at least 20 cardboard banker's boxes, and they were methodically feeding documents into the shredder. Sarah's breath caught. Something about the scene felt wrong. Why were partners, senior partners, doing document destruction themselves? That was a job for staff, for document management specialists. Partners billed $800 an hour. They didn't waste their time on manual tasks. She stepped closer, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Marcus lifted a document from one of the boxes before feeding it into the shredder, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the distinctive color-coded tabs they used for case files. Blue tabs, Henderson Medical Case Files. Her stomach dropped. Why were they destroying Henderson documents? The case was still active. They were in the middle of discovery. Some of those files might be evidence, might be subject to preservation orders. As if sensing her presence, Marcus looked up. His eyes locked with Sarah's through the glass wall. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sarah felt like a deer caught in headlights, every instinct screaming at her to run, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. Marcus's expression didn't change. He simply watched her, his face unreadable. Then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a hunter who'd spotted prey. He said something to Patrick and David, then walked toward the conference room door. Sarah's paralysis broke. She turned to flee, but she wasn't fast enough. Marcus stepped into the hallway just as she reached the stairs. "Sarah," his voice was calm, almost amused. "You're working late." She turned, trying to keep her expression neutral, trying not to show the fear coursing through her veins. "I forgot my phone. I was just leaving." Marcus walked toward her slowly, deliberately. In the dim hallway light, his shadow seemed to stretch forever. "Did you see anything interesting on your way out?" Sarah's mouth went dry. I heard the shredder. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." "Everything is perfectly fine." He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "We're just doing some routine document disposal. You know how it is. We're always buried in paper around here." "Right," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course." Marcus studied her face, his blue eyes cold despite his smile. "Sarah, you're a smart girl. That's why we hired you. You understand how law firms work, don't you? We have clients who depend on our discretion. We have procedures that are confidential." "I understand," Sarah said quickly. "I didn't see anything." "Good." Marcus reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. The gesture might have looked friendly to an observer, but his grip was just slightly too tight. Because ambitious paralegals, the ones who get into law school, who build careers, they're the ones who know when to forget things they've seen. They understand that some things are better left unexamined. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "The last person who worked in your position," Marcus continued conversationally. "Brilliant girl, top of her class, but she had a problem with boundaries. She asked too many questions, got curious about things that weren't her concern." He paused, his grip tightening just a fraction. "She's unemployed now, has been for 8 months, and not just unemployed, unemployable. Amazing how word gets around in legal circles, isn't it?" The message was crystal clear. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes but forced them back. "I understand, Mr. Whitmore. I won't say anything. I didn't see anything." "I know you won't." Marcus released her shoulder and stepped back, his expression pleasant again. "Because you're smart, Sarah, you have a future here. Don't throw it away over nothing. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good, now go enjoy your evening. And Sarah," he paused at the conference room door, "next time you forget something, maybe just leave it until morning." Sarah practically ran for the stairs. She didn't stop running until she was out of the building, down the block, standing at the T station with tears streaming down her face. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her phone. She wanted to call someone, her parents, her sister, the police, but Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Unemployable. Word gets around. That night, Sarah went home and wrote down everything she'd seen in a small notebook. Every detail she could remember: the date, the time, the boxes with blue tabs, the names of the 3 partners. She didn't know what she would do with the information, but some instinct told her to document it. She didn't know yet that what she'd witnessed would haunt her for the next 12 years. She didn't know that those shredded documents contained evidence that could have changed the outcome of the Henderson case, could have saved families from years of fighting for justice. All she knew was that she was terrified, and the dream job she'd been so proud of had turned into a nightmare in the space of 15 minutes. The next morning, Sarah went back to work. She smiled at Marcus in the hallway. She filed documents and organized binders and pretended she'd forgotten everything. But she never forgot, and the weight of that secret grew heavier with every passing day. Sarah thought the fear would fade. She thought that after a few weeks of keeping her head down and focusing on her work, the memory of that night would blur and eventually disappear into the background noise of her busy life. She was wrong. The fear didn't fade, it metastasized. Every time Marcus Whitmore walked past her desk, Sarah's heart rate spiked. Every time her phone rang with an internal extension, she wondered if this was the call that would end her career, or worse. She started having nightmares, standing in that glass-walled conference room while documents burned around her, Marcus's cold smile watching from the shadows, her voice screaming but making no sound. She lost 12 pounds in the first month. Her roommate Jenna noticed but attributed it to the demanding work schedule. "You're working too hard," she'd say, watching Sarah push food around her plate. "You need to take care of yourself." But how could Sarah explain that food tasted like ash, that every bite felt like complicity? The worst part was that life at Whitmore and Associates continued as normal. Marcus was charming and brilliant in court. Patrick Sullivan mentored junior associates with genuine kindness. David Kern donated generously to children's charities. To everyone else, they were exemplary attorneys, pillars of Boston's legal community. Only Sarah knew what they really were. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe the documents weren't important. Maybe it was routine document disposal like Marcus had said. Maybe she'd misunderstood what she'd seen. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she'd pull out her notebook and read her own words: blue tabs, Henderson medical case files, active litigation. August 14, 2012. The Henderson case went to trial in November 2012. Sarah wasn't directly involved in the trial preparation, but she heard the buzz around the office. The family's attorneys had requested specific documents, safety testing results, internal communications about device defects, clinical trial data. Whitmore and Associates responded that no such documents existed or had been destroyed pursuant to normal document retention policies years before the litigation began. Sarah felt sick every time she heard those words, destroyed pursuant to normal policies. She'd seen them destroy those documents 2 months before trial. There was nothing normal about it. The firm won. Henderson Medical was cleared of wrongdoing. The families, 7 of them, Sarah learned, received nothing. Marcus and the other partners celebrated with champagne in the conference room. Sarah excused herself and threw up in the bathroom. "Are you okay?" asked Lisa, another paralegal, finding Sarah pale and shaking by the sinks. "Just a stomach bug," Sarah lied. That night she came so close to calling the Massachusetts Bar Association. She had her phone in her hand, the number pulled up, her finger hovering over the call button, but Marcus's voice echoed in her mind, unemployable. Word gets around. She was 22 years old with student loans and rent to pay. Who would believe her over 3 senior partners? What if they sued her for defamation? What if she couldn't find another job? So she didn't call, and the guilt nearly crushed her. March 2013. Sarah had started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Huang, though she couldn't bring herself to tell the full truth about why she needed help. "Work stress," she said vaguely. Dr. Huang taught her breathing exercises and coping mechanisms, but nothing touched the core of what was eating Sarah alive. She'd also started volunteering at a community center in Dorchester, helping families navigate social services. It was her attempt at penance, doing some good to balance the silence about the bad. That's where she met Rebecca Chen. Rebecca was 34, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her daughter. She came to the community center seeking help with medical bills that were drowning her family. Her daughter, Emma, had been 8 years old when she received a Henderson medical heart monitoring device to manage a congenital heart condition. The device malfunctioned during a routine checkup, Rebecca explained to Sarah, her eyes tired but fierce. Emma went into cardiac arrest. The doctors saved her life, but she has permanent brain damage now. She'll never be the same. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We're suing Henderson Medical," Rebecca continued, pulling out a folder of legal documents. "The lawyers say we have a good case. Other families are suing too. But it's been almost 2 years and Henderson keeps saying their devices were safe, that it must have been doctor error or Emma's pre-existing condition." Her voice cracked. "But I know what I saw. That device failed, and I think they knew it could happen." Sarah's hands trembled as she helped Rebecca organize her paperwork. She wanted to scream, "You're right. They did know. I saw the evidence." But the words stuck in her throat, strangled by fear. "My attorney says the key is getting Henderson's internal testing data," Rebecca said. "If we can prove they knew about defects before Emma's device was implanted, we can win. But Henderson claims no such data exists." She laughed bitterly. "Convenient, right?" Sarah excused herself and barely made it to the bathroom before breaking down completely. She sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't function. A volunteer found her 20 minutes later, still on the floor, and called Dr. Huang's emergency number. That session, Sarah came close to telling the truth. "What if," she asked carefully, "you knew something that could help someone but telling them would destroy your life?" Dr. Huang looked at her thoughtfully. "Sarah, is someone in danger?" I don't know, maybe. It's complicated." "Let me ask you something," Dr. Huang said gently. "When you're 70 years old, looking back on your life, which version of yourself do you want to have been? The one who protected herself or the one who protected others?" Sarah didn't have an answer. She kept volunteering at the community center. She kept seeing Rebecca, kept hearing updates about the lawsuit that was going nowhere. Rebecca's medical bills mounted. Emma required round-the-clock care. The other families in the lawsuit were facing similar struggles: financial ruin, damaged children, a legal system that seemed designed to protect corporations over people. And Sarah said nothing. June 2014. 2 years after that August night, Sarah had become a ghost of herself. She was excellent at her job. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to function on autopilot. She'd even received a performance bonus and hints about law school recommendations. But every success felt like a betrayal. She stopped volunteering at the community center. Seeing Rebecca was too painful. But she couldn't stop thinking about Emma Chen, now 10 years old in a wheelchair, her bright future stolen by a defective device and buried evidence. One night, Sarah sat in her apartment with a bottle of wine she didn't remember buying and Googled the Henderson medical lawsuits. All 7 cases had been dismissed or settled for minimal amounts. The family's attorneys, without the smoking gun evidence that had been destroyed, couldn't prove Henderson knew about the defects. Sarah read testimonials from the families. Rebecca wrote, "My daughter will never go to college, never get married, never have the life she deserved, and the people responsible will never face justice. The system failed us." That was the night Sarah decided to leave. She gave notice the next morning. Marcus seemed surprised but not particularly concerned. "Law school?" he asked. "Taking some time to figure things out," Sarah said. "Well, if you need a recommendation, let me know," Marcus said with that same charming smile that now made her skin crawl. 3 weeks later, Sarah packed everything she owned into her Honda Civic and drove across the country to Seattle. She didn't have a job lined up. She didn't know anyone there. She just knew she couldn't stay in Boston another day. She thought distance would help. She thought starting over in a new city, away from Whitmore and Associates and the Henderson case and Rebecca Chen's tired eyes, would finally quiet the guilt. But guilt doesn't respect geography. It followed her to Seattle. It whispered to her in the middle of the night, "You could have helped them. You chose yourself instead." Sarah built a new life, quiet, small, safe. She worked administrative jobs that didn't require her to think too hard. She adopted a cat. She went to therapy. She never told anyone about Boston, about what she'd witnessed, about the secret that was slowly hollowing her out from the inside. Years passed. The nightmares became less frequent but never fully stopped. Sometimes Sarah would see a news article about medical device litigation, or corporate fraud, or whistleblowers, and her chest would tighten with the familiar weight of her silence. She told herself she'd made the right choice. Self-preservation was human nature. She'd been young and scared and alone. Anyone would have done the same. But late at night when she couldn't sleep, Sarah knew the truth. She'd chosen comfort over courage, and 7 families had paid the price. She thought she'd carry that secret to her grave. Then, 12 years after that August night, a federal subpoena arrived, and Sarah had to decide whether she was ready to finally face what she'd been running from, or spend the rest of her life running. The flight from Seattle to Boston felt like traveling backward through time. Sarah pressed her forehead against the airplane window, watching clouds drift past, her stomach churning with each mile that brought her closer to the city she'd fled 12 years ago. She hadn't slept. She'd barely eaten. The protein bar she'd forced down at the airport sat like lead in her stomach. When the plane touched down at Logan International, Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely unbuckle her seatbelt. "You can still leave," a voice in her head whispered. "Buy a return ticket. Go home. Pretend you never got the subpoena." But she didn't. She collected her carry-on bag and followed the crowd through the terminal, one foot in front of the other, running on autopilot and sheer determination. The United States Attorney's Office had arranged for her to stay at a hotel near the courthouse, a clean but impersonal Hampton Inn where everything was beige and bland. Sarah checked in, dropped her bag in her room, and stared at her phone. She was supposed to call Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Torres immediately upon arrival. For 20 minutes, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, unable to make herself dial. What would she even say? How could she explain 12 years of silence? Finally, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Torres, Jennifer, USAO. Sarah's heart hammered. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello." "Ms. Mitchell." The voice was warm but professional, with a hint of a New York accent. "This is Jennifer Torres. I'm so glad you made it to Boston. I know this must be incredibly difficult for you." Something about the kindness in her voice made Sarah's throat tight. "I'm here," she managed. "Would you be willing to meet this afternoon? I'd like to talk through everything before you testify. There's a cafe across from the courthouse, quiet, private. Would that work?" Sarah closed her eyes. "Yes, what time?" "How about 3 o'clock? That gives you a couple hours to settle in." After they hung up, Sarah lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about running. She thought about all the reasons she'd stayed silent for 12 years. And she thought about Emma Chen. At 2:45 p.m., Sarah walked into Café Paradise, a small coffee shop with exposed brick walls and the rich aroma of espresso. She spotted Jennifer Torres immediately, a woman in her mid-40s with intelligent dark eyes, professional attire, and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She was sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee already waiting. "Sarah," Jennifer stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming, please sit." Sarah shook her hand and slid into the booth, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm coffee cup. "I don't know what I can tell you that will help." "You can tell me the truth," Jennifer said simply. "That's all I need." For the next hour, Jennifer laid out the case against Whitmore and Associates. It wasn't just about the Henderson medical case, she explained. The federal investigation had uncovered a pattern of evidence destruction spanning 20 years. Multiple cases, multiple clients, millions of dollars in fraudulent billing. "We have financial records," Jennifer said, sliding documents across the table. "We have testimony from a forensic accountant. We have emails from a whistleblower in the firm's IT department who preserved server data before it could be wiped. But what we don't have is an eyewitness to the actual document destruction." Sarah's coffee had gone cold in her hands. "How many cases?" "At least 16 that we can prove, probably more." Jennifer's expression was grim. Marcus Whitmore and his partners made it an art form. They'd identify damaging evidence during discovery, claim it was subject to routine document retention policies, and destroy it before anyone could verify it existed. They covered their tracks carefully, almost perfectly. Almost. The IT whistleblower gave us deleted emails showing Marcus ordering specific document destruction. But Marcus's defense is that he never personally destroyed anything, that he was just following the firm's legitimate policies and any actual destruction was done by staff. Jennifer leaned forward. "That's where you come in, Sarah. You saw him. You saw all 3 of them physically feeding documents into a shredder during active litigation. Your testimony proves intent." Sarah felt like she was going to be sick. "He threatened me. After I saw him, he said I'd be unemployable if I said anything." "I know," Jennifer said gently. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you were put in that position. I'm sorry you've had to carry this alone for 12 years. She paused. "But Sarah, this is your chance to stop him, to give those families justice." "The Henderson families," Sarah whispered. "What happened to them?" Jennifer's expression softened with sympathy. "Would you like to know?" Sarah nodded, even though she was terrified of the answer. Jennifer pulled out a folder. 7 families total. The Chens, the Rodriguezes, the Johnsons, the Patels, the O'Connors, the Washingtons, and the Kozlowskis. All children between ages 6 and 12 when they received defective Henderson devices. All suffered serious complications, cardiac arrests, strokes, permanent neurological damage. She spread photographs across the table. Children in hospital beds, children in wheelchairs, families with exhausted, grief-stricken faces. Without the evidence that Marcus destroyed, they couldn't prove Henderson knew about the defects. Their lawsuits were dismissed or settled for minimal amounts, barely enough to cover ongoing medical costs. Most of these families are in severe financial distress. Some have declared bankruptcy. And the children, Jennifer's voice caught slightly. They're living with permanent disabilities that could have been prevented if the truth had come out. Sarah stared at the photos, tears streaming down her face. "I could have helped them. 12 years ago, I could have told someone." "Yes," Jennifer said, not sugarcoating it. "You could have, but you were 22, scared, and facing threats from powerful people. I understand why you stayed silent, but Sarah, you have a chance now to make it right." "It's too late for them." "Maybe not." Jennifer pulled out another document. "If we convict Marcus and prove the evidence destruction, the Henderson families can reopen their cases. The destroyed documents are in Henderson's records. Marcus only destroyed the firm's copies. With proof that evidence was deliberately hidden, the families can get new trials. They can finally get justice." Sarah looked up sharply. "Really? Really? Your testimony doesn't just put Marcus in prison. It gives these families a second chance." Jennifer slid one more photograph across the table. "This is Emma Chen, age 15 now." Sarah's breath caught. The photo showed a teenage girl in a wheelchair, wearing a school uniform, smiling at the camera despite everything. She had Rebecca's eyes, tired but fierce. "She's in high school," Jennifer continued. "She loves art. Her teacher says she's incredibly talented. She wants to be a graphic designer someday. Her medical care costs $400,000 a year. Rebecca Chen works 3 jobs and is still drowning in debt. Sarah couldn't stop staring at the photo. This was the 8-year-old she'd heard about 14 years ago, now a teenager who'd lost her childhood to a preventable injury. "Rebecca will be in the courtroom when you testify," Jennifer said quietly. "All 7 families will be there. They've been waiting a long time for someone to tell the truth." Sarah wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "What if Marcus gets to me? What if he threatens me again? He has money connections." "He's currently out on bail with an ankle monitor and strict conditions," Jennifer interrupted. "He can't contact witnesses. If he tries, he goes to jail immediately. You'll have protection, Sarah, I promise you." "But after the trial, if he's acquitted?" "He won't be acquitted, not with your testimony." Jennifer's voice was confident, certain. "But I won't lie to you, there will be consequences. Marcus has powerful friends. Your name will be public. You might face harassment, legal threats. It won't be easy." Sarah thought about the last 12 years of her life. The nightmares, the guilt, the weight of silence that had slowly crushed her spirit. Running had brought her safety but not peace. "Tell me about the trial," she said finally. "What do I need to do?" Jennifer smiled, small but genuine. "You need to tell the truth, that's all. Tell the jury exactly what you saw on August 14, 2012. I'll guide you through it." "Marcus testified already." "Yesterday, very smooth, very confident. Claimed everything was by the book. His attorney, Martin Cross, is one of the best defense lawyers in the country. He'll try to tear you apart on cross-examination." Sarah's stomach dropped. What will he ask? Why you waited 12 years, why you never reported it. He'll suggest you're lying, that you have ulterior motives, that your memory is faulty. Jennifer's eyes were steady. "But Sarah, the truth is on your side. You took notes. You remember details. And most importantly, you have nothing to gain from this. That makes you credible." They talked for another hour, going over the timeline, the specific details Sarah would need to testify about, the potential questions from both sides. Jennifer was patient and thorough, never making Sarah feel stupid or ashamed for her years of silence. As they were preparing to leave, Jennifer touched Sarah's arm. "One more thing. There's someone outside who'd like to thank you for coming forward. You don't have to meet her if you're not ready, but—" The cafe door opened. A woman walked in, and Sarah knew immediately who she was. Rebecca Chen had aged more than 14 years since Sarah had last seen her at the community center. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face lined with exhaustion. But her eyes, those fierce, determined eyes, were exactly the same. Behind her, in a motorized wheelchair, was Emma. Sarah stood frozen as they approached. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," she whispered, "Jennifer told me you're the witness, that you saw what they did." Her voice broke. Thank you for finally being brave enough to speak." Sarah couldn't find words. She looked at Emma, who smiled shyly, and something inside Sarah's chest cracked open. All the guilt, all the fear, all the years of running. "I'm sorry," Sarah choked out. "I'm so sorry I didn't come forward sooner." "You're here now," Rebecca said, pulling Sarah into a fierce hug. "That's what matters, you're here now." When Sarah walked back to her hotel that evening, the Boston streets didn't feel quite as suffocating as they had that morning. She had 48 hours before she would take the stand. 48 hours to find the courage she'd lost 12 years ago, the night before testimony. Sarah couldn't stay in her hotel room. The walls felt like they were closing in, the bland beige decor suffocating her, the silence amplifying every racing thought. It was 9:47 p.m. and she was supposed to testify at 10:00 a.m. the next morning, less than 12 hours away. She paced the small space between the bed and the window, her phone clutched in her hand, checking it compulsively every few minutes. Jennifer Torres had texted earlier, "Get some rest. You're going to do great tomorrow. Call me if you need anything." Rest? The idea was laughable. Sarah hadn't slept more than 3 hours since arriving in Boston. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus Whitmore's cold smile, heard his voice. Ambitious paralegals know when to forget things they've seen. Her phone buzzed. Sarah jumped, her heart hammering. It was her sister Melissa calling from Denver. "Hey," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sarah, please don't do this." Melissa's voice was urgent, pleading. "I've been thinking about it all day. This is insane. These people are dangerous." "I have to." "No, you don't," Melissa interrupted. "You can still back out. Say you're sick. Say you can't remember. Say anything. But don't put yourself in the crosshairs of people like Marcus Whitmore." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over her. "Mel, you didn't see those families. You didn't see Emma Chen in her wheelchair." "I know it's terrible," Melissa said, her voice softer now. "I know you feel guilty. But Sarah, you can't save everyone. You have to protect yourself. What if he comes after you? What if his lawyers destroy your reputation? You'll never work again. You'll never have peace." "I don't have peace now," Sarah whispered. "I haven't had peace in 12 years. There was a long silence. Then Melissa sighed. "I just don't want to lose my sister. Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." After they hung up, Sarah's phone immediately rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize, a Boston area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Mitchell," the voice was male, smooth, professional. "This is Martin Cross. I'm representing Marcus Whitmore. I hope you don't mind me calling." Sarah's blood ran cold. This was Marcus's defense attorney, the man who would cross-examine her tomorrow. "How did you get this number?" "I'm sorry to disturb you so late," Cross continued, ignoring her question. "I wanted to reach out before tomorrow's proceedings. I think there may be some misunderstandings about what happened 12 years ago, and I'd hate to see you put yourself in a difficult position." "I have nothing to say to you," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Please just hear me out. I've reviewed your employment records from Whitmore and Associates. Excellent performance reviews, glowing recommendations. Marcus has nothing but positive memories of working with you." His tone was reasonable, almost friendly. "The human memory is a tricky thing, Ms. Mitchell. 12 years is a long time. Sometimes we remember things differently than they actually happened. Sometimes stress and guilt can create false memories." "I know what I saw," Sarah interrupted. "I'm sure you believe that," Cross said smoothly. "But consider this. If you testify tomorrow and my cross-examination reveals inconsistencies in your memory, you could be opening yourself up to perjury charges. Federal perjury carries serious penalties, prison time." The threat was clear even though his tone remained pleasant. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all. I'm simply advising you to think carefully about the consequences. You're a private citizen now, living a quiet life in Seattle. Tomorrow you'll be in the national spotlight. Every detail of your life will be scrutinized. Every relationship, every job, every decision you've ever made. The media can be quite ruthless." He paused. "It's not too late to reconsider. You could tell the prosecutor that your memory is unclear, that you're not certain of what you saw. No one would blame you." "Goodbye, Mr. Cross," Sarah said and ended the call, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She stood and resumed packing, her mind racing. The call was clearly meant to intimidate her, but it had worked. She was terrified. What if Cross did destroy her on cross-examination? What if she couldn't remember the details clearly enough? What if? Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Sarah's stomach dropped as she opened it. No words, just a photograph. It was her apartment building in Seattle, clearly taken within the last few days. The angle showed her living room window, her car in the parking lot. Someone had been watching her home while she was gone. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat hard on the bed, staring at the photo, her breath coming in short gasps. They knew where she lived. They'd been to her apartment. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a direct threat. She should call Jennifer Torres. She should call the police. but her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her mind couldn't focus beyond the primal fear coursing through her veins. What had she been thinking? That she could testify against one of Boston's most powerful attorneys and just go back to her normal life? That there wouldn't be consequences? Sarah pulled up flight booking websites on her phone. There was a red-eye to Seattle leaving at 1:00 a.m. She could be at the airport in 30 minutes. She could disappear, change her number, maybe even move to a different city. Start over again. Her finger hovered over the Book Now button. People who see things don't last long here. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. Sarah thought about the last 12 years. The nightmares, the therapy, the constant weight of guilt. She thought about how many times she'd replayed that August night, wishing she'd been braver, wishing she'd spoken up when it mattered. And she thought about Emma Chen's smile in that photograph, the fierce determination in Rebecca's eyes. Her phone rang. Sarah nearly screamed, but when she looked at the screen, she saw it was Rebecca. "Hello," Sarah answered, her voice barely audible. "Sarah, it's Rebecca. I'm sorry to call so late. I couldn't sleep. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. "I know you must be scared," Rebecca continued. "Jennifer told me about Marcus's attorney calling you. That was completely inappropriate and she's filing a complaint. But Sarah, I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they throw at you, you're not alone. There are 7 families who have your back. We're all going to be there in that courtroom, and we believe you." "Rebecca, someone sent me a photo of my apartment," Sarah choked out. "They're watching me. They know where I live." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Did you tell Jennifer?" "Not yet. I'm scared. I'm so scared." "Of course you are. You'd be crazy not to be." Rebecca's voice was steady, grounding. "Sarah, do you know what Marcus and his people don't understand? They think fear is enough to control people. They think threats and intimidation will always work, but they're wrong." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've lived with fear for 14 years. Fear that Emma would die, fear that we'd lose our home, fear that the people who hurt my daughter would never face justice. And you know what I learned? Living in fear isn't really living at all." Rebecca paused. "Tomorrow you have a choice. You can let them win through intimidation, or you can take your power back. You can finally stop running." Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are. You flew across the country, you walked into the prosecutor's office, and you agreed to testify. That took incredible courage. Tomorrow is just one more step, one more moment of bravery. And Sarah," Rebecca's voice softened, "Emma wanted me to tell you something. She's 15 now, old enough to understand what you're doing. She said to tell you that you're her hero." Sarah broke down completely, sobbing into the phone. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel terrified." "Heroes always are," Rebecca said gently. "That's what makes them heroes. They're terrified, but they do the right thing anyway." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the dark hotel room for a long time, holding her phone, staring at the threatening photograph. She thought about booking that flight to Seattle. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong. But she also thought about Emma Chen, about the other 6 children whose lives had been forever altered by corporate greed and buried evidence. She thought about 12 years of nightmares and guilt. At 11:34 p.m., Sarah made her decision. She forwarded the threatening photo to Jennifer Torres with a message. "They're trying to scare me. It won't work. I'll see you in court tomorrow." Then she turned off her phone, took the sleeping pill her doctor had prescribed for emergencies, and lay down on the bed. Her heart was still racing. Her hands were still shaking. But somewhere beneath the fear was something else, something that felt almost like peace. She was done running. Tomorrow she would point at Marcus Whitmore. She would speak the truth. And whatever happened after that, at least she would finally be free of the silence that had imprisoned her for 12 years. Sarah closed her eyes and against all odds fell asleep. When her alarm went off at 6:00 a.m., The first thing she did was look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked exhausted, terrified but determined. "You can do this," Sarah whispered to her reflection. In 4 hours she would walk into that courtroom. In 4 hours everything would change. She got dressed slowly, carefully, a simple navy suit, nothing flashy. She pulled her hair back. She put on minimal makeup. She looked professional, credible, trustworthy. At 8:30 a.m. Jennifer Torres called. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but ready." "That's my girl. Remember, Sarah, just tell the truth. That's all you have to do. The truth is powerful enough." "What if they come after me afterward?" "We'll handle it. You won't be alone, I promise you that." At 9:15 a.m., Sarah walked into the federal courthouse. Security was tight, metal detectors, bag searches, stern-faced marshals everywhere. The building was magnificent, marble columns, soaring ceilings, the weight of justice carved into every stone. Jennifer met her in the lobby. "The courtroom is packed. Press, families, spectators, are you ready?" Sarah took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked together down the hall, their footsteps echoing. Sarah could see the courtroom doors ahead, large, imposing, final. This was it, no more running, no more hiding. Sarah Mitchell was about to face Marcus Whitmore one last time. And this time she wouldn't stay silent. The courtroom doors opened, and Sarah felt like she was stepping into another world. The space was massive, high ceilings with ornate molding, dark wood paneling that absorbed light and sound, rows of benches packed with people. So many people. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. The gallery was filled to capacity. She recognized some faces immediately. Rebecca Chen sat in the front row, Emma beside her in her wheelchair. The other families were there too, parents with tired eyes and determined expressions, some holding hands, some sitting rigid with tension. Behind them were reporters with notepads and recording devices, sketch artists with their pads ready, law students observing, curious spectators who'd lined up at dawn for seats. And there, at the defense table, sat Marcus Whitmore. He looked exactly as Sarah remembered, barely aged in 12 years. His suit was impeccable, probably cost $5,000. His dark hair was perfectly styled with just a touch of distinguished gray at the temples. He sat relaxed, confident, occasionally leaning over to whisper something to his attorney, Martin Cross. When Sarah walked in, Marcus glanced up. Their eyes met. He smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just a small, knowing smile that said, "I still own you." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. Jennifer Torres steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "You've got this," she whispered. "Remember, he can't hurt you here. Look at the families. They're with you." Sarah forced herself to look away from Marcus and focus on Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. Emma was watching her too, and despite everything, the teenage girl was smiling, brave, hopeful. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Everyone stood as the judge entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She surveyed the packed courtroom with an expression that suggested she tolerated no nonsense. "Please be seated," Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair. "We're here for Day 4 of United States versus Whitmore and Associates. I understand the prosecution has a witness." Jennifer Torres stood. "Yes, Your Honor, the United States calls Sarah Mitchell to the stand." Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She stood on shaking legs and walked toward the witness stand. The distance felt endless, every eye in the courtroom tracking her movement, every step echoing in the vast space. The witness stand was elevated, enclosed by dark wood, positioned between the judge and the jury. 12 jurors sat watching her, 6 men, 6 women, faces impassive but attentive. Sarah couldn't read their expressions. Were they sympathetic, skeptical, bored? The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Please raise your right hand." Sarah's hand trembled as she lifted it. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. Please state your name for the record, the bailiff instructed. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. She cleared her throat, trying to sound stronger. You may be seated. Sarah sat, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. From this vantage point, she could see everything. The judge to her right, the jury to her left, Jennifer Torres standing at the prosecutor's table directly ahead, and beyond her, Marcus Whitmore watching with that same unsettling calm. Jennifer approached with a warm, reassuring smile. Good morning, Ms. Mitchell. Thank you for being here today. I know this isn't easy for you. Good morning, Sarah managed. Let's start with some background. Where do you currently live? Seattle, Washington. And what do you do for work? I'm an administrative assistant at a nonprofit organization that helps homeless families find housing. But that wasn't always your career, was it? No, Sarah's throat felt dry. Someone had placed a glass of water on the stand. She took a sip with shaking hands. Could you tell the jury about your educational background? I graduated from Boston University in 2012 with a degree in political science. I was planning to go to law school. And after graduation, where did you work? Sarah's eyes involuntarily flicked to Marcus. He was leaning back in his chair, completely relaxed, as if this were a mildly interesting afternoon diversion rather than a trial that could send him to prison for years. Whitmore and Associates, Sarah said, a law firm here in Boston. What was your position? Paralegal. I worked primarily for the litigation team. Jennifer walked Sarah through the preliminaries, her start date, her duties, her performance reviews. It was all factual, straightforward, designed to establish Sarah as a credible witness. But with each answer, Sarah felt the weight of what was coming pressing down on her. Ms. Mitchell, did there come a time when you witnessed something unusual at Whitmore and Associates? This was it, the moment everything hinged on. Sarah's mouth went dry. She reached for the water glass again, her hands shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim. Take your time, Jennifer said gently. Sarah looked out at the courtroom. The families were watching her with desperate hope. The reporters were poised to capture every word. The jury was leaning forward slightly, attention focused. And Marcus was still smiling. Yes, Sarah whispered. I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell. You'll need to speak up so the jury can hear you. Yes, Sarah said louder, her voice cracking. August 14, 2012. Can you tell us what happened that night? Sarah's prepared testimony evaporated from her mind. She'd rehearsed this with Jennifer dozens of times, but now, under the weight of all those eyes, the words scattered like leaves in wind. I went back to the office, late, around 7:45 p.m. I'd forgotten my phone. And what did you observe? Sarah's eyes found Marcus again. He was no longer smiling. He was watching her intently, and even across the courtroom she could feel the force of his will pressing down on her. Don't say it. You know what happens to people who talk. I heard a machine, a shredder. Her voice was getting quieter again despite her efforts. On the 4th floor, the executive floor. What did you do? I went to see what it was. Sarah's hands were gripping the chair arms so tightly her knuckles were white. There was a conference room, glass walls, the lights were on. And what did you see in that conference room? Sarah opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. She saw Marcus 12 years ago, his hand on her shoulder, his voice cold and threatening. She saw herself at 22, terrified and alone. She saw all the years of running, hiding, trying to forget. Ms. Mitchell, Jennifer prompted gently, what did you see? I saw. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now. She was losing it. All the courage she'd built up, all the determination, it was crumbling under the weight of 12 years of fear. Tears began streaming down her face. She tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out. In the gallery, Rebecca Chen leaned forward, her expression anguished. Emma was gripping her mother's hand, looking scared. "Your Honor," Martin Cross stood smoothly. "Perhaps the witness needs a moment to compose herself." It was phrased as courtesy, but Sarah heard the subtext. See, she can't even tell her story. She's unstable, unreliable. Judge Morrison looked at Sarah with concern. "Ms. Mitchell, would you like to take a brief recess?" "No," Sarah forced out. Taking a recess would only make this harder. She had to do this now or she never would. "Ms. Mitchell," Jennifer said, her voice firm but kind, "I'm going to ask you a very direct question, and I need you to answer clearly for the jury. Did you see anyone in that conference room on August 14, 2012? Sarah's hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring with tears. The courtroom felt like it was spinning. "Yes," she whispered. "Can you identify who you saw?" This was the moment. Sarah looked at the defense table, at Marcus Whitmore sitting there in his expensive suit with his high-powered attorney, still protected by wealth and power and privilege. She looked at the jury, 12 ordinary people who held justice in their hands. She looked at Rebecca and Emma, at the other families whose lives had been destroyed by buried evidence. "Ms. Mitchell," Jennifer said quietly, firmly, "can you identify who you saw destroying documents that night?" Sarah's hands gripped the witness stand. Her heart was hammering. Her whole body was shaking. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, everyone waiting, holding their breath. This was it, no more running, no more hiding, no more letting fear win. Sarah lifted her eyes and looked directly at Marcus Whitmore. And the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Sarah looked up from her trembling hands. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, past the jury with their expectant faces, past Jennifer Torres standing ready to guide her, past the packed gallery where dozens of people waited for her words. Her gaze landed on Marcus Whitmore, and something inside her shifted. For 12 years, this man had lived in her nightmares. For 12 years, his threat had controlled her life, dictated her choices, stolen her peace. He sat there now, perfectly composed in his $1,000 suit, absolutely certain that fear would silence her one more time. He was wrong. Sarah thought about Emma Chen in her wheelchair, about Rebecca's exhausted face, about 6 other families destroyed by buried truth. She thought about every sleepless night, every panic attack, every moment she'd hated herself for staying silent. "No more." Sarah lifted her right hand and pointed directly at Marcus Whitmore. Her arm was steady, her finger unwavering. "Him," her voice rang out clear and strong, filling every corner of the vast courtroom. "Marcus Whitmore." The courtroom erupted. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, frantically scribbling. Marcus's relaxed posture stiffened, his face draining of color. But Sarah wasn't finished. She kept her hand pointed at him, her eyes locked on his, and continued. "And those two." She shifted her finger to where Patrick Sullivan and David Kern sat in the gallery, both men looking stunned. Patrick Sullivan and David Kern, all 3 of them. I saw all 3 of them destroying documents on August 14, 2012. "Objection," Martin Cross shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is..." "Overruled," Judge Morrison said sharply. "The witness will continue." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word, 12 years of suppressed truth pouring out. It was approximately 8:15 p.m. I'd returned to the office to retrieve my phone. When I got to the 3rd floor, I heard the industrial shredder running on the executive floor above me. I went upstairs to investigate. She could see Marcus's jaw clenching, the first crack in his perfect facade. "There's a large conference room on the 4th floor with glass walls," Sarah continued, her testimony now flowing like a river breaking through a dam. "The lights were on inside. I could see everything clearly. Marcus Whitmore, Patrick Sullivan, and David Kern were positioned around a commercial shredder, the large one, the kind that can destroy hundreds of pages per minute. "What else did you observe?" Jennifer Torres asked, her voice steady and encouraging. Boxes, at least 20 cardboard bankers' boxes, were stacked around the room. They were feeding documents into the shredder, one after another. Fast, methodical, like they'd done it before. "Did you notice anything specific about these documents?" "Yes." Sarah's voice was absolutely certain now. The boxes had colored tabs on them, blue tabs. I recognized them immediately because I'd worked with that filing system every day. Blue tabs designated the Henderson medical device litigation case. The courtroom exploded again. Several family members in the gallery began crying. Marcus leaned over to whisper urgently to Cross, his composure finally cracking. "Order!" Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "I will have order in this courtroom." Sarah didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The truth was a physical force now, demanding release. I saw document headers as they were being fed into the shredder. Safety testing protocols, clinical trial results, internal memoranda with the Henderson medical logo. These were active case files, documents that should have been preserved for litigation. Objection. Cross was on his feet again. Speculation. The witness couldn't possibly have read. "I could read them," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the objection. "I was standing 15 feet away. The glass walls were clear. The lighting was excellent. I saw Marcus Whitmore hold up one document before shredding it. It was a safety report dated 2009, 3 years before the devices were implanted in children. The header read Preliminary Safety Concerns, Cardiac Monitoring System Model HM847. The specificity of her testimony silenced the courtroom. Jurors were writing frantically. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her expression intense. "Ms. Mitchell," Jennifer said, "what happened after you observed this?" Sarah's eyes never left Marcus. He saw me. We made eye contact through the glass. For maybe 5 seconds we just stared at each other. Then he smiled, this cold, calculating smile, and walked toward me. Sarah described the encounter in excruciating detail. Marcus's measured approach, his calm voice, the veiled threat disguised as friendly advice. The way he'd gripped her shoulder just hard enough to hurt. His words about ambitious paralegals knowing when to forget things. The story about her predecessor who became unemployable. "He told me explicitly that people who see things don't last long at the firm," Sarah said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. "He made it clear that if I said anything about what I'd seen, my career would be destroyed. I was 22 years old, $80,000 in student debt, no family money, no connections. I was terrified." "Did the document destruction stop after you saw them?" "No." Sarah's testimony became even more damaging. "Over the next 6 months, I witnessed it happen 3 more times. Different cases, same pattern. Late nights, executive floor, the 3 of them destroying case files during active litigation. The Merrick Pharmaceutical case in October 2012. The Brightwell Insurance fraud case in December. The Patterson medical malpractice case in February 2013. "Objection," Cross thundered. "Your Honor, this is beyond the scope." "It goes to pattern and intent, Your Honor," Jennifer countered. "Directly relevant." "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison ruled. "Continue, Ms. Mitchell." Sarah detailed each instance, dates, times, which cases, what she saw. Her memory, preserved in that notebook she'd kept hidden for 12 years, was crystal clear. She described how she'd started documenting everything in writing, keeping notes in case she ever found the courage to speak. "Why didn't you report this at the time?" Jennifer asked, getting ahead of the obvious cross-examination question. "I was scared," Sarah said simply. Marcus Whitmore was a senior partner at one of Boston's most powerful firms. His father founded the firm. He had connections throughout the legal community. I was nobody, a paralegal fresh out of college. Who would believe me? And even if they did, what would happen to me? She paused, her voice breaking. I chose my career over justice. I chose safety over truth. and I've regretted it every single day for 12 years. In the gallery, Rebecca Chen was openly weeping. Emma reached up to squeeze her mother's hand, tears streaming down her own face. The other families were holding each other, some crying, some staring at Marcus with expressions of raw fury. Marcus Whitmore was no longer smiling. His face had gone from confident to pale to flushed red. His hands were clenched into fists on the table. For the first time, he looked like what he was, a man facing the destruction of everything he'd built through lies and intimidation. "Ms. Mitchell," Jennifer said gently, "is there any doubt in your mind about what you saw on August 14, 2012? "None whatsoever." Sarah's voice was absolutely certain. "I saw Marcus Whitmore, Patrick Sullivan, and David Kern deliberately destroying evidence in the Henderson medical case and at least 3 other active litigations. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't routine document retention. It was obstruction of justice." Sarah finally lowered her hand, but her eyes remained locked on Marcus. "And I'm done being silent about it." The courtroom was absolute chaos now. Judge Morrison's gavel pounded repeatedly. Reporters were rushing out to file stories. Defense attorneys were in urgent huddles. But through it all, Sarah sat in the witness stand, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. She'd pointed, she'd spoken, and the truth had frozen Marcus Whitmore's world in seconds. Jennifer Torres approached the stand with a look of profound respect. "No further questions, Your Honor." Now came the hard part, cross-examination. Martin Cross stood slowly, his expression calculating. He just watched his client's case implode, but he was too skilled to show panic. "Ms. Mitchell," Cross said, his voice dripping with skepticism, "you expect this jury to believe that you remember specific details from a single night 12 years ago, details like document headers and dates." Sarah looked at him calmly. "I don't just remember, Mr. Cross. I documented everything in writing the same night. I still have those notes." Cross's expression flickered surprise, then concern. "You have notes?" "Yes, a complete written record made within hours of each incident. I can provide them to the court." Jennifer Torres was already pulling a small notebook from her briefcase, the one Sarah had given her days earlier. She held it up. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to introduce Exhibit 47, Ms. Mitchell's contemporaneous notes." Cross's cross-examination, which should have destroyed Sarah's credibility, instead reinforced it. Every question he asked, she answered with specific documented details. The harder he pushed, the more credible she became. After an hour, Cross finally gave up. No further questions. Sarah stepped down from the witness stand on shaking legs, but this time the trembling was from exhaustion and relief, not fear. As she walked past the defense table, Marcus Whitmore stared at her with undisguised hatred. Sarah stared right back. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. In the gallery, Rebecca Chen stood and began clapping. Then Emma joined her, then the other families, then spectators throughout the courtroom. Judge Morrison didn't stop them. Sarah had done it. After 12 years of silence, she'd finally told the truth. And nothing would ever be the same. The Boston Federal Courthouse was packed again, but this time Sarah Mitchell sat in the gallery instead of on the witness stand. 6 months had passed since her testimony, 6 months that had transformed everything. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom, her expression grave. "Please be seated. We're here for the sentencing of Marcus Whitmore, who was convicted by jury on 12 counts of obstruction of justice, 7 counts of fraud, and 5 counts of witness intimidation." The jury had deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on every single count. Sarah would never forget that moment, the foreperson standing to read "guilty" again and again, while Marcus Whitmore's face crumbled, his perfect facade finally shattering completely. Patrick Sullivan and David Kern had taken plea deals immediately after, agreeing to testify against Marcus in exchange for reduced sentences. Now came the final reckoning. Marcus stood before the judge, his expensive suit unable to hide how much he'd diminished. He looked older, smaller, defeated. His attorney made a perfunctory argument for leniency. Marcus's previous good character, his charitable work, his family who needed him. Judge Morrison listened impassively. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, you were given every privilege in life. Elite education, family connections, a prestigious career. You could have used those advantages to uphold justice. Instead, you corrupted it." Her voice was steel. "You destroyed evidence that would have helped injured children receive justice. You threatened young employees into silence. You built a career on lies and intimidation." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This court has received victim impact statements from 7 families whose children suffered because of your actions. I've read every one. The Chens, whose daughter Emma lives with permanent neurological damage. The Rodriguezes, who lost their home paying for medical care. The Johnsons, whose son will never walk again. The financial devastation, the emotional trauma, the stolen futures, all because you chose profit over truth." Marcus's attorney placed a hand on his shoulder as he swayed slightly. "The sentence of this court is 8 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution totaling $4.7 million to be distributed among the victim families. Whitmore and Associates Malpractice Insurance will pay an additional $47 million in settlements. You are hereby disbarred from practicing law in any jurisdiction." Judge Morrison's gavel fell with finality. "Bailiff, take the defendant into custody." As federal marshals led Marcus Whitmore away in handcuffs, he passed within feet of Sarah. For a moment their eyes met one last time. Sarah saw no remorse there, only bitterness and rage. But she felt no fear, only pity for a man who destroyed himself through his own corruption. The courtroom erupted as soon as the doors closed behind Marcus. Reporters rushed out to file stories. The victim families embraced each other, crying tears of relief and vindication. Rebecca Chen found Sarah in the crowd and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for being brave enough to finally speak." Emma wheeled over, her face radiant despite tears. "You saved us, Sarah. You gave us our lives back." The settlement money wouldn't erase what happened to these children, but it would pay for their ongoing medical care, their therapies, their education. It would lift the crushing financial burden that had defined these families' lives for years. It was something. It was justice, finally served. 1 year later, Seattle, Washington. Sarah sat in her apartment, a new one, larger and brighter than before, with her laptop open on the kitchen table. Pepper dozed on the windowsill in a patch of sunlight. The Seattle skyline sparkled outside, but Sarah's attention was on the email she was composing. It was addressed to a young paralegal named David Chen, no relation to Rebecca, who'd contacted her through the whistleblower advocacy organization Sarah had joined. David had witnessed his supervising attorney destroying evidence and didn't know what to do. He was terrified, just as Sarah had been 12 years ago. "Dear David," Sarah typed, "I understand your fear. I lived with that fear for 12 years and it nearly destroyed me. But I want you to know something important. Silence protects the guilty and slowly destroys the innocent. You have a choice right now that I wish I'd made sooner." After Marcus's conviction, Sarah's life had changed in ways she never imagined. Yes, there had been consequences. Marcus's powerful friends had tried to retaliate with lawsuits and harassment. But Jennifer Torres had kept her promise. Sarah wasn't alone. The U.S. Attorney's Office provided protection. The victim families stood by her. Media coverage painted Sarah not as a traitor, but as a hero who'd risked everything for justice. The harassment eventually died down, especially after Whitmore and Associates completely collapsed. The firm closed within 3 months of the verdict, its reputation destroyed, its partners facing their own legal battles. The message was clear: witness intimidation wouldn't be tolerated. Sarah had been invited to testify before Congress about strengthening whistleblower protections in the legal profession. She'd spoken at law schools about ethics and courage. She joined the board of a nonprofit that supported witnesses in corporate fraud cases. Her quiet life in Seattle was no longer quite so quiet, but it was purposeful in a way it had never been before. Most importantly, she'd found peace. The nightmares had stopped. The crushing guilt had lifted. She could finally sleep through the night. 3 months after the sentencing, Sarah had attended Emma Chen's art show at her high school. Emma's pieces were stunning, vibrant, emotional, full of life. One painting in particular had made Sarah cry. It showed a woman standing in a courtroom, her hand raised, light streaming through windows behind her. Emma had titled it The Truth Speaker. "That's you," Emma had said shyly. "You spoke for all of us when we couldn't speak for ourselves." Rebecca had pulled Sarah aside that night. "Emma wants to be a lawyer now. She wants to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. She said you inspired her." That moment had meant more to Sarah than any media recognition or congressional testimony ever could. Sarah finished her email to David Chen, reading it over one more time. "I won't tell you that coming forward is easy. It isn't. There will be consequences, and some of them will be difficult. But I promise you this: living with the truth, even when it's hard, is better than living with silence and guilt. You'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror. You'll be able to sleep at night. You'll be free. If you decide to come forward, I'll help you. You won't be alone. There's an entire community of whistleblowers and advocates who will stand with you. Fear is powerful, but truth is more powerful. Whatever you decide, I believe in you. With courage and solidarity, Sarah Mitchell." She hit send, then closed her laptop. Pepper stretched and meowed, demanding attention. Sarah smiled and scratched behind his ears, looking out at the Seattle afternoon. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca. "Emma got accepted to Boston University, pre-law program. She's so excited." Sarah's eyes filled with happy tears. Emma, who'd been 8 years old when a defective medical device destroyed her health, who'd grown up in a wheelchair fighting for justice, who'd waited 14 years to see the truth acknowledged, was going to become a lawyer. The little girl whose case had haunted Sarah's conscience for over a decade was going to fight for others. And it was partly because Sarah had finally found the courage to speak. That evening, Sarah went for a walk along Puget Sound. The water sparkled in the fading light, ferries gliding across the waves, mountains looming in the distance. She thought about the woman she'd been 12 years ago, terrified, silenced, trapped by fear. And she thought about who she was now, a survivor, an advocate, a truth speaker. She'd pointed, she'd spoken, and in those few seconds of courage, she'd freed not just 7 families, but herself. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her sister Melissa, who answered on the first ring. "Hey, how are you?" "I'm good," Sarah said, and for the first time in 12 years, she meant it completely. "Actually, Mel, I'm better than good. I'm free." That night, Sarah slept peacefully, without nightmares, without guilt, without the crushing weight of buried truth. She dreamed of Emma Chen graduating law school, of Rebecca finally smiling without exhaustion shadowing her eyes, of 7 families who'd found justice because one terrified woman had finally found her courage. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, Sarah had learned. It was pointing your finger and speaking your truth even when your whole body shakes with terror. It was choosing what's right over what's safe. It was understanding that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And as dawn broke over Seattle, Sarah woke to a new day, one where she could finally say she was proud of who she'd become. She'd survived 12 years of silence. But it was the moment she broke that silence that she'd finally started living. The end.